The courtroom buzzed with murmurs as Emily Carter slouched in her seat, arms crossed, a smirk playing on her lips. The young, entitled girl barely acknowledged the judge in front of her, tapping her nails against the desk in boredom. Judge Marcus Bennett watched her in silence, his expression unreadable. He had seen defendants like her before, privileged, arrogant, convinced that the rules didn't apply to them. Emily rolled her eyes as her defense attorney whispered something to her, waving him off with a dismissive flick of her wrist. When the judge finally spoke, his deep, steady voice cut through the room like a blade. "Miss Carter," he said, his tone calm but firm, "I suggest you start taking this seriously." She scoffed, leaning back in her chair. "Oh, please. My parents will take care of this." Judge Bennett's eyes narrowed slightly. She had no idea what was coming. "Where are you watching from? Comment below and subscribe for more shocking courtroom stories." Judge Marcus Bennett's gaze remained steady on Emily Carter as she leaned back in her chair, exuding an air of entitlement that filled the courtroom. She was young, privileged, and clearly used to getting her way. Her designer outfit, manicured nails, and dismissive attitude painted the picture of someone who had never faced true consequences in life. Her parents' money had shielded her from accountability, and she believed today would be no different. The courtroom, however, was not impressed. The prosecutor, a middle-aged man with sharp eyes, shuffled his papers, prepared to lay out the case. Emily's defense attorney, looking increasingly anxious, whispered to her again, urging her to stay quiet. But Emily simply let out an exaggerated sigh, as if she were being forced to endure an inconvenience beneath her. Her lack of concern was evident. Judge Bennett was well respected, known for his fair but firm rulings. He had spent decades upholding justice, ensuring that privilege did not outweigh responsibility. He had encountered arrogant defendants before, but Emily's level of disregard for the legal system was particularly unsettling. This wasn't just about her crime. It was about her complete lack of respect for the process, the people involved, and the consequences that awaited her. The courtroom was filled with an audience, some curious onlookers, others directly affected by Emily's reckless behavior. A woman in the back clutched her purse tightly, shaking her head in disapproval. A young man, seated a few rows behind Emily, whispered to his friend, both of them watching intently. They all knew why she was there. She wasn't a victim. She was the cause. Judge Bennett folded his hands and leaned forward slightly. "Miss Carter, you sit in this courtroom as a defendant, not as a guest," he said, his voice even but firm. "I expect you to act accordingly." Emily let out a light chuckle, shaking her head. "Oh, come on. It's not that serious." A hush fell over the room. Even the prosecutor glanced up in disbelief. Judge Bennett's expression didn't change, but a distinct shift in the air made it clear this was the moment where patience would soon run out. Emily's attorney looked mortified. "Your Honor," he interjected quickly, "I apologize for my client's behavior." Judge Bennett raised a hand to silence him. "No need, Counselor. Miss Carter will speak for herself. That is, after all, what she seems intent on doing." He turned his eyes back to her, his stare unyielding. "Tell me, Miss Carter, do you believe the law doesn't apply to you?" Emily scoffed. "I just think everyone is overreacting. My parents already said they'll take care of everything." Judge Bennett let out a slow breath, nodding slightly. He had heard enough. She still thought this was a game. But soon, she would learn that in his courtroom justice was not something money could buy. Judge Marcus Bennett remained silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on Emily Carter, who still sat with a smirk on her face. The courtroom air grew tense, the quiet stretching uncomfortably long. Everyone in the room could feel it, the moment before patience completely runs out. Emily, however, remained unfazed. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "Look, Your Honor, I don't know why this is taking so long. My parents already talked to their lawyer. This is just a formality, right?" Her voice was light, almost playful, as if she were in a casual conversation rather than facing a judge. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Some shook their heads in disbelief, others whispered to one another. The prosecutor shifted in his seat, tapping his pen against the desk, waiting for Judge Bennett's reaction. Judge Bennett exhaled through his nose, slow and deliberate. He had seen plenty of defendants in his courtroom, remorseful ones, angry ones, scared ones. But arrogance? Arrogance like this was a rare kind, and it was the most dangerous. He knew that entitlement bred recklessness, and recklessness without consequence would only continue to spread. He adjusted his glasses and leaned forward slightly. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice calm, but with an unmistakable weight behind it, "do you understand the charges against you?" Emily sighed dramatically, rolling her eyes. "Yes, I ran a red light. So what? No one got hurt." The prosecutor cleared his throat loudly. "Your Honor, the defendant didn't just run a red light. She sped through a crowded intersection at twice the legal speed limit and nearly hit a pedestrian. Had they taken one more step, we would be in a much different courtroom." Emily shrugged. "But I didn't hit anyone, so why is everyone acting like I did?" Gasps could be heard throughout the courtroom. Even her attorney buried his face in his hands. Judge Bennett's jaw tightened. He clasped his hands together, taking a long moment before responding. When he did, his voice was no longer patient. It was firm, commanding, final. "Miss Carter, your complete lack of remorse is disturbing." Emily's smirk faltered slightly, but she quickly forced it back, shifting in her seat. "I just don't see why this is such a big deal." Judge Bennett pressed his lips together before speaking again. "Tell me something, Miss Carter. Had that pedestrian been someone you cared about, your father, your mother, a friend, would it still not be a big deal?" Emily blinked, her confidence flickering for the first time. She had never been challenged like this before. Judge Bennett continued, his voice unshaken. "Do you know how many people have sat in this very chair, sobbing, because they didn't get the chance to say it wasn't a big deal before it was too late? Do you know how many lives have been ruined because of a second of carelessness?" Emily swallowed, but said nothing. "For you, this is a joke," Judge Bennett continued, his eyes never leaving hers. "For others, it's the moment that destroys their lives." The weight of his words settled heavily in the room. Emily's smirk was gone now, her fingers tightening around the edge of the table. She had spent her whole life getting away with everything, but this time, something felt different. The courtroom sat in still silence, waiting. Judge Bennett had just made it clear. Emily wasn't walking out of this as easily as she thought. The tension in the courtroom was suffocating, as Judge Marcus Bennett's words settled over everyone like a heavy storm cloud. Emily Carter's smirk had completely vanished. Her fingers curled against the table, her entitled confidence now cracking under the weight of the reality she had ignored for far too long. She had never been challenged like this, never forced to confront the idea that actions had consequences. Real, serious consequences. Judge Bennett let the silence stretch, his steady gaze never leaving Emily. The entire courtroom waited, watching, as the young girl who moments ago had treated the legal system like an inconvenience finally began to realize that this wasn't just another moment her parents could fix. He leaned forward slightly, his voice controlled but heavy with meaning. "Miss Carter, I want you to look around this courtroom," he said. "Do you see how many people are here? Do you understand that these people, your own community, are here today because your actions could have cost someone their life?" Emily didn't respond immediately. She shifted in her seat, glancing toward the gallery where several onlookers sat, their faces unreadable. Her attorney kept his head down, probably wishing he were anywhere else. The prosecutor sat still, waiting for what was coming next. Judge Bennett's voice hardened. "The problem, Miss Carter, is not just that you broke the law. The problem is that you refuse to take responsibility for it." He exhaled slowly, shaking his head. "You ran a red light at twice the legal speed limit, nearly struck a pedestrian, and even now you sit here, trying to convince me this is nothing more than an inconvenience to your life." Emily's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. For the first time, she didn't have a response. Judge Bennett's voice lowered, but it somehow carried more force than when he had raised it. "What if you had hit that person? What if their family was sitting in this courtroom right now, staring at you, waiting for justice? Would you still be sitting here, rolling your eyes, acting like it doesn't matter?" Emily's throat tightened. The weight of his words settled in her chest like a brick. "Let me be clear," Judge Bennett continued. "This courtroom is not a playground for the privileged. You will not receive a special deal because your parents have money. And I will not tolerate disrespect for the law, not from you, not from anyone." A single sniffle broke the silence. Emily's mother, who had been sitting in the gallery, wiped away a tear, her previously confident posture faltering. Even she, someone who had always fixed everything for her daughter, knew that this was beyond her control. Judge Bennett straightened. "I have given you every opportunity to show me that you understand the severity of this case, and yet you've treated this courtroom like a joke. So let me tell you exactly what's going to happen next." Emily stiffened. Her hands tightened into fists on her lap. The final moment was coming, and she knew this was one mistake she wouldn't be able to undo. Emily Carter's heart pounded as Judge Bennett's piercing stare locked onto her. The courtroom, which she had dismissed as nothing more than an inconvenience, now felt suffocating. The once distant murmurs of the audience faded into silence, leaving only the weight of her actions pressing down on her shoulders. She had walked in here expecting another slap on the wrist. Instead, she was now facing a reality she had never prepared for. A world where her last name, her wealth, and her family's influence wouldn't protect her. Judge Bennett exhaled, his voice steady but filled with authority. "Miss Carter, your behavior today has made it clear that you do not understand the severity of your actions. You believe this courtroom is just another place where your family's influence can protect you. Let me be very clear, not in my court." His words rang out sharp and unwavering, his presence commanding the entire room. For the first time, Emily felt her confidence crack. Her usual defiance, the smirk she had worn like armor, had vanished. She shifted uncomfortably, her hands gripping the table in front of her. The overwhelming realization crept in like a slow-moving storm. There was no way out of this. She cast a quick glance at her attorney, silently pleading for some kind of reassurance, but he refused to meet her eyes. He simply sat still, shoulders tense, knowing that there was no argument that could save her now. Judge Bennett leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping lower, but somehow becoming even more powerful. "You think this is just about you?" he asked. "That your reckless choices have no real impact?" He reached for a file on his desk, flipping it open. The moment the pages rustled, Emily's stomach twisted. The judge pulled out a statement, a victim's testimony. He adjusted his glasses and began reading aloud, his tone unshaken. "I was walking home from work that evening, crossing at the light, when I saw the car speeding toward me. There was no time to react. I remember hearing the tires screech, feeling my legs lock up in terror and thinking, this is it. This is how it ends." A ripple of unease moved through the courtroom. A few people in the audience gasped softly, while others exchanged glances, their expressions hardening. This wasn't just a case on paper. This was real. The words hung in the air, heavy and unforgiving, as if daring Emily to continue pretending this wasn't serious. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She had never even thought about the person she almost hit. She had been so focused on dismissing this case, treating it like a minor inconvenience, that it had never even occurred to her that there was a real human being on the other end of her reckless decision. Judge Bennett looked up from the file, his gaze sharp and direct. "Miss Carter, you may not have killed anyone, but make no mistake, you nearly did. And instead of recognizing that, you walked into this courtroom with a smirk, convinced you were untouchable." Emily swallowed hard. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, to say something, anything, to lessen the crushing weight of the moment. But what was there to say? She had no excuse, no justification, no way to take back her arrogance. Her mother, who'd been watching from the gallery, sat frozen in place. The confident posture she had maintained earlier was now gone. She clutched the edge of her purse, her knuckles turning white, as if holding on to something tangible would keep this from spiraling further. Even she knew now there was no fixing this. No amount of money, no high-powered attorneys, no carefully worded apologies could undo what had already been done. Judge Bennett exhaled, straightening in his chair. His verdict was set, his voice unwavering as he prepared to deliver the words that Emily would never forget. "Your actions were reckless, your attitude disgraceful, and your lack of remorse deeply troubling," he stated. "Since you do not seem to grasp the seriousness of this case, allow me to teach you." Emily braced herself, her fingers digging into the table as panic surged through her. She could feel her heart hammering against her ribs. This wasn't a warning. This wasn't a light punishment. This was real. She wasn't ready for what was coming next. The courtroom remained eerily silent, every eye locked on Emily Carter, who now sat motionless, her fingers gripping the edge of the table as if bracing for impact. The air felt thick with tension, and for the first time since walking into this courtroom, she looked genuinely afraid. The reality she had ignored, the weight of her actions, had finally settled onto her shoulders. Judge Marcus Bennett, unwavering in his presence, let the silence linger before delivering his final ruling. "Miss Carter, given your blatant disregard for the law and your complete lack of remorse, I have no choice but to impose a sentence that will ensure you understand the gravity of your actions." His voice remained steady, but there was no mistaking the authority behind his words. "You will serve 6 months of community service at a trauma center for accident victims. You will work directly with those whose lives have been shattered due to reckless driving. And," he continued, his gaze piercing through her, You will attend mandatory court-supervised rehabilitation programs focused on accountability and responsibility. A stunned murmur spread through the courtroom. Emily's face drained of color. She had expected a fine, maybe probation, something her family could fix with a check. But this was something she couldn't escape. Her mother's lips parted as if to speak, but she quickly closed her mouth. Even she knew that no argument, no plea, no well-connected attorney could overturn what had just happened. For the first time, money had no power here. Emily finally found her voice, though it was shaky. 6 months, she stammered, her eyes wide with disbelief. But I didn't even hit anyone. Judge Bennett didn't flinch. You nearly did. And that is enough. His tone carried finality. You sit here today, not because of luck, but because someone else's reflexes saved their life. Had they taken a step too soon or hesitated a second too long, you would be facing far worse consequences. Your reckless actions endangered lives, and the fact that you treat this as an inconvenience is exactly why this sentence is necessary. Emily's breathing grew shallow. Her entire life had been one of privilege, where every mistake, every poor decision had been wiped clean by influence and wealth. But now, she was trapped in a reality where her last name held no weight. Judge Bennett leaned back slightly, his expression firm but calm. You wanted to treat this courtroom like a joke, Miss Carter. Let's see if you still find this amusing when you're standing in a hospital, looking into the eyes of someone whose life was permanently changed by someone just like you. A heavy pause filled the room. The words sank in, wrapping around Emily like chains. She turned to her attorney, desperate, her voice barely a whisper. You can appeal this, right? You can fix this. Her attorney sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. This ruling is final, Emily, he muttered. There was nothing to fix. The courtroom sat in silence, as if the weight of justice itself had settled over everyone in attendance. Judge Bennett glanced around the room, letting his message resonate. This case is not just about one individual, he said, addressing not just Emily, but everyone watching. It is about accountability. Privilege does not erase responsibility. No one is above the law. With a final knock of the gavel, court was adjourned. Emily sat frozen in place. For the first time in her life, she was truly powerless. Emily Carter remained in her seat long after the gavel struck, her world spinning around her. She had walked into the courtroom expecting another easy escape, another mistake wiped clean. But now she was facing something she had never known before, real consequences. The murmurs of the courtroom buzzed around her, but she barely heard them. 6 months of community service, working with victims, seeing firsthand what reckless decisions could do. It wasn't a prison sentence, but to someone like her, it might as well have been. Judge Marcus Bennett stood, gathering his papers, his expression unreadable. He had seen many cases over the years, but this one left a deeper impression. He knew that justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about teaching lessons that could change lives. Whether Emily would truly learn from this or not was up to her. But one thing was certain. Her privilege hadn't saved her this time. As she finally stood to leave, her mother trailed behind her, silent, no longer the confident woman who had once believed she could fix anything. There would be no special favors, no erased mistakes, no avoiding the reality she had created. For the first time, Emily would have to face who she truly was. Do you think Judge Bennett's verdict was fair? Let us know in the comments. If you believe in justice, like, share, and subscribe for more powerful courtroom stories.